Hello and a warm welcome to the Energy Nexus podcast series. We are on the sidelines of the Namibia International Energy Conference for 2026. As you know by now, I've had the opportunity to sit opposite a number of leaders within the energy space. And today we decided to touch base with the CEO of Rhino Resources, Mr. Travis Smithard. He'll give us some insight into not only the positioning that they have as an oil company that have found amazing discoveries across the coastline of Namibia, but more so what it will really take to work in partnership with policymakers, with financiers and industry peers to make sure that we really capitalize on the journey of moving to first oil. Travis, I'm excited to have you with us and thank you so much for your time. Fantastic. I must tell you first things first. We're here at the 2026 conference, but in compiling some research and reading up on your progress since we last potentially saw each other last year, 2025 was a fantastic year for Rhino Resources when it comes to discoveries. Maybe refresh our memory, but just help us fully capture what kind of potential this truly holds.
Thank you, Gugu. It's lovely to be here. I think 2025 was a remarkable year, and we've been very fortunate. A number of wells have been drilled in the basins outboard of us, Galp obviously having made some discoveries themselves.
Yeah.
But really the discoveries that we made were, in our opinion, game changers for the industry.
Yeah.
The reason why we believe that is we drilled, as you've rightly pointed out, 3 discoveries.
Yeah.
We drilled Sagittarius as our very first discovery. It was a nice lean gas condensate discovery. That was largely led on the geophysics of the basin. We decided thereafter let's open up the spectrum. Let's have a look at the other end, which is geologically based.
Right.
And we went and drilled Capricornus, made a phenomenal black oil discovery, so very different to Sagittarius. And that really gave us the confidence to sort of push the limit and push the envelope in terms of what's possible on this block. So we went and drilled Valence, as you rightly put, towards the end of last year and made a phenomenal gas condensate discovery, very rich gas condensate discovery. And that really kind of gave us a very strong platform with which to holistically evaluate our position on the block, evaluate not just the block, but also the broader region, trying to understand, how are there synergies potentially in the future for gas developments with Total, Galp, and really where do we fit in within this burgeoning ecosystem?
100%. That's very poignant, especially given the theme for this year's conference, the road to discovery, the road to first oil, I beg your pardon, and beyond. And it makes perfect sense because you have the wonderful discoveries, and congratulations on that, by the way. But how do we take it forward? And share your perspective with us as an oil producer, but more so the camaraderie and partnership we also need from infrastructure players, financiers, policymakers to make sure that we move in unison going forward.
I think Namibia's at a really critical position. I think industry has, over the last, let me say 4 or 5 years, really imported a lot of technical expertise into country. I think the discoveries themselves have validated the potential. And I think you might know, but our slogan is potential defined.
Yes.
Here at Rhino Resources. So we see the potential, have seen the potential. And I think what's really required to move us from discovery potential to development and then production is now less of a technical question and more of a financial, commercial, policy decision. And I think that's where, as you've rightly put it, collaboration with government, partnership with government. This is a nascent industry in Namibia. So it really is beholden to us as operators to bring the win-win situation to government and say, look, this is how we partner with you. This is how we can create value for your stakeholders, which happens to be the citizenry of Namibia. And this is the way that we go about that. So I think today, we're very excited about what Her Excellency is trying to do in terms of bringing petroleum into the presidency's office. I think, there are various opinions on that. I think from our perspective, we're excited about the strategic import of oil and gas in Namibia. I think
Yes.
that it raises the level of engagement. And so from our perspective, we need to now start to incorporate maybe lessons learned from other African jurisdictions.
Yes.
Right, I think Namibia is at a very fortunate position where some may say it's late to the game. I'd say it's perfect timing for them to capitalize off the lessons learned. Look at Egypt and their gas liberalization, right? The implementation of independent gas regulators, third-party access to infrastructure. Let's try and incorporate some of those deregulatory
Yes.
type steps that the Egyptians have taken to open up the market. I think if you look at Angola have been phenomenal in introducing some, quite frankly, revolutionary pieces of legislation to look at unlocking marginal field developments. Really sort of incentivizing investors to come into their country and really put investment and put liquidity into projects that otherwise, under the previous tax and fiscal regimes, was not attractive. And I think we can really start to use some of those tenets in Namibia. Namibia's got great fiscals, got great, potential to get into early liquidity. But I think we need to start to capture some of those lessons and actually implement them in regulation.
100%. That's much of the theme driving conversations here for this year's conference. And I guess given the nations you've highlighted, the examples that you've pulled at, if you had to prioritize, I guess, three things or three themes that should be a key area of focus for Namibia, what would those be? Taking a look at the pros and cons, given the examples you shared with us from across the continent.
So it's a very timely question. I sat with the UPU yesterday with the Honourable Shilunga and Mr. McLeod.
Yeah.
And, I'm very specific that in Namibia, we need a gas master plan. The reason for that is quite simply, I can't underpin my project economics if I don't have clarity, certainty, and indeed predictability as to what government's expectation is for associated gas in Namibia.
And it should be specified to gas, not just a generic oil or energy theme?
I think the reality is that Namibia is at a position where generating revenue and cash flow today, in the current global economic environment, that's the first prize. So as an oil operator and on behalf of our JV, we're obviously looking at different development options.
Got you.
Rhino's perspective, and this is not a JV perspective yet, we're obviously still working through that, but Rhino's perspective is really how do we maximize the liquid production out of our reservoirs? Because on the time value of money basis, those liquids will underpin your developments. Thereafter, in a phased approach, as you start to re-inject your gas to recover more of your liquid, you may get into a position in 5, 7, 10 years' time where your reservoirs are now largely gas rather than liquid. And at that point, you can start to diversify and bring in gas extraction and gas monetization through export pipelines, through FLNG or LNG or whatever it might look like. But I think what we're trying to propose as a company is let's get a gas master plan in play. Let's make sure that the government is clear as to what their expectation is. Let's try and as an industry indicate what we would require in order for the project to be economic, and let's set that baseline. Second to that would actually be how do we move from project economics to fiscal stability?
Got you.
Because as I've rightly pointed out to a number of our colleagues, there's no good having great fiscals if we don't have project economics.
Precisely.
But likewise, no good having project economics if the fiscals erode those economics through time based on additional profit taxes that are unlevered or actually are incorrectly applied based on a revenue sharing model that can change through the time and the lifespan of the project. So
Got you.
We really want to sort of dig into, how do we make sure that these internal rates of return are attractive to our investors, but at the same time generating revenue and growth for the government. And then thirdly, I'd say, bringing Namibia onto the global stage, I've really advocated for Namibia taking a leadership role in Southern Africa and actually globally now with what's happened with the conflict in Iran. There's more of an import to West African oil or West African energy. So I would say Namibia has the opportunity, indeed has the mandate to take more of a leadership role going forward. And I think what they can start to do by showing the world that they're a serious country that's going to take leadership seriously is starting to join some of the conventions around arbitration.
100%.
Nobody ever wants to talk about disputes. That's always the bad news element. But the reality is it just gives certainty to both parties as to how do we go about resolving differences. Because no one wants to get into dispute. Nobody wants to get into arbitration. But if you have a framework that says, look, this is how we resolve, this is how we go about making sure that this dispute doesn't hinder our progress, then I think Namibia needs to start to get onto the global stage for that. And that's part of our conversations.
Got you. Makes complete sense in terms of that three-pronged approach to prioritize. Travis, I do want us to talk about local content. I know it's probably a theme that you have discussed very often on multiple platforms, but give us some context as an oil company coming in, how you're prioritizing local content and more so partnering with the right institutions in Namibia to make sure that that's a journey that is successful in terms of the outcomes the country's looking for.
Local content, I feel, is the term I somewhat struggle with. I think I've been public about that. I like the term local upliftment instead, because I think local content can sometimes become a tick box exercise. And I think government is nervous of companies just fulfilling the bare minimum in order to get by. Likewise, companies are often nervous that government has too high of an expectation that erodes your project, right? And you look at Brazil, they've relaxed their local content participations. And so I think there's always a balance. But if you can get the ethos right, which is you're coming into a country, you're coming to invest in its people. The resources belong to the nation. So it ultimately means that although I'm going after oil and gas, I'm investing in the future of this nation, in this citizenry. So from our perspective, we try to do that at a grassroots level. The petroleum agreements that we sign are very explicit in terms of the use and the expectation of the use of Namibian goods and services.
Okay.
So it's very prescriptive for us. There is no ambiguity from our perspective as to what Namibian local content looks like.
Got you.
I think how we implement that really is the million-dollar question. Our perspective is let's try and link local businesses to the multinationals, the likes of Halliburton, Schlumberger, SBM,
Yes.
Technip FMC. Obviously we have relationships with those service providers for a much, longer term perspective than some of these local services, right? But I think if we can get into a position where we can facilitate that conversation, maybe even make the introduction, then I think it's up to those local service companies to integrate and to show these multinationals what value they can provide.
100%.
Right? And it shouldn't just be an entitlement that because I am of this host nation, therefore I should get. It's actually, I am of this host nation, this is what I can provide to bring more investment into my country. And I think as an operator, our objective, our goal, and indeed our ethos is to make sure that we get the right types of people together, put them into a serious adult room, and we can make grown-up decisions as to what long-term investment looks like.
Definitely. Travis, one thing I appreciate is that you've touched quite a bit on partnership, and that sits at the ethos of how Rhino Resources has really positioned itself in the Namibian market. But as we wrap up our conversation, we can't ignore that we are in the midst of a conference. There's a lot of background noise, engagements, various delegates who have joined us in this conversation, and you're an emerald sponsor for the Namibia International Energy Conference, which shows your unwavering support. But I can imagine also talks about the kind of objectives and goals that you see us discussing. So what are some of the key outcomes you hope will be discussed at this year's edition of the NIEC, and more so, how we take it forward?
Very good. That's a fantastic question. And, we look at sponsorship as influence. And really, us supporting NIEC, we fundamentally believe in Selma's message. I think we fundamentally believe in the type of narrative that this type of a conference actually generates. And I think it's about being good stewards across the industries. I think there's a very particular personnel quantum that comes to this particular conference, and really want to support the NIEC as an emerald sponsor in bringing those conversations to the fore. As an operator, I have both the privilege and responsibility indeed to execute my mandate, which is to go out and look for oil and gas and to bring that to the nation for its development and for its growth. So we really try and facilitate, again, the conversations between service providers, other oil companies, government, and even external governments. We've got a very strong American backing from our financiers. We've obviously then got American political affiliations in terms of, who our shareholders know within the Trump administration. And I think there's just a very strong drive for Namibia to grow. There's a very strong drive for Namibia to excel and to succeed. And I think from our perspective, it's just how do we play our small role in collaborating with the service providers, with the citizens of Namibia, and indeed with our fellow operators to making the environment conducive to growth, the ecosystem healthy, and whatever small part we can play to contribute, we would happily do and continue to do.
100%. Well, 2025 was a great year. I hope 2026, 27, 28, onwards and upwards to the growth and opportunities that you can explore as we all journey towards first oil. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Travis.
Thank you. It's lovely to speak to you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
That's the CEO of Rhino Resources, Travis Smithard.